Hi, ArcfieldWeather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Wednesday morning, July the 2nd. I thought I'd focus in on the global tropical scene in this video discussion. Here we are now into the beginning of the month of July. The real peak of the Atlantic Basin tropical season comes middle part of September, typically ramps up in August to that peak in the middle part of September, and then kind of ramps down during the month of October. We'll take a look at some of the important players, such as the sea surface temperatures around the globe, where we've been over the last several weeks, and where we may go over the next several weeks here. This is the current sea surface temperature anomaly map here from tropicaltidbits.com. And one of the important areas I always like to look at, the equatorial part of the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean is, of course, the largest ocean. It has the biggest impact on overall global tropical activity. You can see a lot of neutral, maybe even a little bit colder than neutral here, a little bit on the La Nina side. La Nina conditions are colder than normal water temperatures, whereas El Nino are warmer than normal waters. It looks like neutral to a little bit below normal. This is the equator. Let me draw the equator line going roughly in this kind of a horizontal position here. So again, the all-important tropical equatorial part of the Pacific Ocean, relatively neutral, maybe a tad below neutral on the La Nina side of things. It looks like, we'll take a look at a compilation of forecast model projections here. It looks like these conditions, very similar to this, may continue right through the summer, through the fall. In other words, nearly neutral, maybe a little bit below neutral, a little bit colder than normal. A weak La Nina out across this part of the Pacific Ocean for the next several months. That's what the indications are right now. So it's something we'll closely monitor here. Not only does it have an impact on the Pacific Ocean activity, but what goes on in the Pacific certainly has an impact on the Atlantic Basin. Now, speaking of the Atlantic Basin, let's take a look here. Right around the equatorial part of the Atlantic Ocean, cooler than normal conditions, almost like its own La Nina. We really talk about La Nina and El Nino with respect to the Pacific Ocean, but this is really like a La Nina condition right here in the equatorial part of the Atlantic Ocean. This is an area of high interest here, in my opinion, where we see these cooler than normal conditions all the way from the west coast of Africa, which is right here, into the main development region of the Atlantic Ocean. We call that the main development region because it tends to be the breeding ground area for tropical systems, tropical waves that typically come off the west coast of Africa and then travel to the west in the trade winds, which move from east to west, or move systems from east to west. The Caribbean Sea, largely below normal temperatures right now. The Gulf is kind of a mixed bag here, a little bit warmer than normal, a little bit colder than normal. But this is an important player here. If you take a look at our forecast for the tropical season, I tended to lean towards normal, which is less activity than last year, and I continue to feel that way. Some out there believe it will become an above normal season. We'll wait to see on that. I hope I'm right, and it's a normal or even a quieter than normal type of season. But this is one of the important factors here, the normal to below normal temperatures in the main development region of the Atlantic Basin. Now, talked about the equator. Interestingly, you have some warmer than normal areas here, maybe about 35 degrees north or so, right here, the western part of the Atlantic Ocean, much of the upper part of the Pacific Ocean. Again, we're looking at maybe a latitude of about 30, 35 degrees here, where we have quite a bit of warmer than normal water temperature. So again, that's quite interesting that the equator is generally normal to maybe below normal with respect to water temperatures. And by the way, there's been quite a drop-off in water temperatures in the equatorial region. And we'll take a look at a map there with respect to that change during the past year or so. But you go to this mid-latitude area, and we're dealing with warmer than normal conditions and actually an increase in temperatures, water temperatures here over the past year. And here's the map that I alluded to. This is a temperature change of the water from a year ago. What we're looking at is the current temperatures minus the water temperatures of a year ago, the end of June of this year minus the end of June of last year. Anywhere you see the blue represents a cooling off. And again, talked about quite a cool off here in much of the equatorial part of the Pacific Ocean, and a real dramatic cool off here in that main development region of the Atlantic Ocean here. This is not necessarily at the equator itself, but just to the north side of it, from the Caribbean Sea to the tropical Atlantic, a big cool down over the last year. It's very interesting, something we'll continue to monitor over the next several weeks here. But these are big changes near or right along the equator here since a year ago. Now, I talked about go to the mid-latitudes and you have warmer than normal water, and indeed you have a big warm-up here compared to a year ago in the middle latitudes sections of the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. It's hard to tell here. This is the Mediterranean Sea right here, above normal temperatures there, and quite a bit of a warm-up from a year ago. This map, by the way, posted by meteorologist Joe Bastardi of Weather Bell Analytics. So very interesting temperature changes around the world with respect to sea surface, and with a big drop-off in the main development region of the Atlantic Ocean from a year ago, and cooler from a year ago out across that all-important central part of the Pacific Ocean. Now, speaking of the Pacific Ocean and that all-important central part of the Pacific Ocean, let's take a look ahead here. This is a map of a compilation of forecast models for water temperatures going forward. It puts out the temperatures for rolling 3-month averages here. For example, this is the August, September, October time period. Again, this is the heart and soul of the Atlantic Basin tropical season, as we discussed earlier. But this forecast, this compilation of forecasts, goes all the way out to the winter time. This is actually the rolling 3-month average right here at the end here, February, March, and April of 2026. Now, the way to view this kind of a plot, anything above the neutral line is in El Nino territory, and this is the neutral line right here, the zero line right here. Anything below, colder than normal water, La Nina conditions. And as you can tell here, we really stay very close to that neutral line for the next several months. Very consistent trend here. That's kind of interesting because normally water temperatures vary a little bit more than this, but this is a very consistent trend, near normal, perhaps a tad on the colder than normal side of things, on the La Nina side of things. By the way, these thick lines right here, there's really two big numbers here I'd like to look at. One is the average of the dynamical models, and one is the average of the statistical models. Statistical models tend to kind of rely a lot on climatology. Dynamical models tend to change more and more with the current conditions and the influx of current data. So this is probably the first thing I like to look at, this average of the dynamical models right here, this thick red line going forward all the way out into the winter of 2025, 2026, near that neutral line, maybe a little bit on the colder than normal side. By the way, anything within this like plus or minus a half, generally considered to be neutral. So for sure, we're looking at what's projected to be neutral temperatures. Again, this is the central Pacific Ocean. The average of the statistical models, a little bit colder maybe than the dynamical model, but still relatively weak La Nina signal, or basically neutral here. So very kind of consistent pattern here in terms of overall forecasts for the central Pacific Ocean, something we'll continue to monitor. Of course, it has an impact on the tropical season, not only in the Pacific Ocean, but also in the Atlantic Basin. But this also could play a role in the upcoming winter season here of 2025-2026, specifically the water temperature anomalies in the central part of the Pacific Ocean. Well, where do we stand right now with respect to global tropical activity? Again, the season is still young. For example, the Atlantic Basin really peaks by around the middle part of September. So it is young, but wanted to kind of stop and take a look here at where we stand. What we're looking at here, I focus in on this accumulated cyclone energy. We've talked about this before. In my opinion, this is probably the best way to track global tropical activity. You can just look at the number of storms and end right there, but I think the accumulated cyclone energy, or ACE, is the better way to do it because it takes into consideration not only the number of storms but the longevity of these storms. So a storm that is powerful and lasts for a long time will add a lot to the accumulated cyclone energy. And what we're looking at here on this particular table, which by the way comes from Colorado State University, the normals for this particular date of July the 2nd, and this goes through July the 2nd here, are shown here in parentheses. This is a normal ACE for this time of the year. In other words, in the Atlantic Basin right now, we are below normal. Again, it's very early. That could quickly change to an above normal type of season in the Atlantic Ocean. We've had 2 weak systems, 2 short-lived systems, and when they're weak and when they're short-lived, they do not contribute much at all to the accumulated cyclone energy. Both of these, this number right here is a reflection of the A storm and the B storm. Barry, I believe, was the second storm that moved into the eastern part of Mexico. So all in all, a couple of weak systems and below normal in the Atlantic Basin. But the real interesting area to me is right here, the western part of the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean, by far the most important ocean with respect to global tropical activity, and of the Pacific Ocean is kind of split normally by meteorologists into the Eastern Pacific and the Western Pacific. And of those 2 sectors, probably the Western Pacific Ocean is the biggest contributing factor to overall global tropical activity. And it is very, very quiet for this stage. Now, the Pacific Ocean tropical season officially begins on May 1st, gets underway normally before the Atlantic Basin gets cooking here, but way below normal out across the western part of the Pacific Ocean. This is not a short-term trend. We've kind of been below normal out across the western Pacific Ocean for several years now. And this is contributing to these numbers right here. This is the entire northern hemisphere. That includes the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the Indian Oceans here. Almost about a third, not quite that low, but about a third of normal for this stage of the season. Again, we're early in the season here, but ACE is well below normal for this time of the year when you include the entire northern hemisphere, and largely dictated by what's going on in the western part of the Pacific Ocean. Something of interest, something that has global impact, and something we'll monitor closely over the next several weeks. Now, let's take a look here at what's going on right now in the Atlantic Ocean. There's been a tropical system right here over the peninsula of Florida over the last several days. It has produced some beneficial rainfall. They were very, very dry earlier this year across much of Florida, but that has changed, and they're now catching up to the normals here, and largely as a result of some tropical moisture. Now, there's a system right here that has kind of been meandering around, a tropical wave, and it very likely pushes off to a position out over the open waters of the southwestern Atlantic, and it could conceivably intensify at that point in time, perhaps eventually becoming a named tropical system. We've had, again, these 2 weak tropical systems so far, named tropical systems. One was out here over the central Atlantic, and another in the western Gulf, and it moved into the eastern part of Mexico. This system could, let's say by the early part of next week, become a named tropical system, and whether or not it becomes named, the tropical moisture could very well push up the Atlantic seaboard. It could go a little bit inland of there. It's something we'll monitor, again, whether or not it becomes named, but it has a chance of becoming named because I think the circulation center ends up ends up over the open waters of the very warm southwestern Atlantic Ocean. And we'll take a look at some forecast maps in a moment here. The GFS from last night and other models reflect this as well. Do have possibilities with that tropical system with respect to pushing tropical moisture up along the eastern seaboard, maybe even the development of this system into a named tropical storm, something we'll take a look at here over the next several days. Well, let's wrap up by walking through the surface forecast maps from last night's 0Z run of the GFS. These maps from tropicaltidbits.com. First of all, we had some tremendous boomers last night and yesterday afternoon in the Mid-Atlantic region, the Northeast U.S. producing tremendous amount of rainfall in that area, largely as a result of a surface cold front that is now kind of stalling out right in this area right here. It'll linger for a while and produce some residual showers and maybe isolated thunderstorms, let's say from around the I-95 corridor, points to the south and east there, to the coastal sections of the Delmarva, of New Jersey, coastal New England, again, over the next several hours here. Then clearing skies will set in really from northwest to southeast as that front starts to kick into gear again and push farther and farther to the south and east. Now, notice as we begin the day here, on Wednesday, a lot of green showing up here over the northeastern Gulf, all associated with that weak tropical wave. Now let's push forward in time here and we'll see the potential impact of this tropical system up along the Atlantic seaboard. Again, by later today, that front finally moves off the mid-Atlantic coastline here, clearing skies set in. Still some rainfall here in and around the Florida Peninsula. Again, they've had decent amount of rain over the last several days, which has alleviated the drought conditions that they were experiencing early in the year. Then we go into the day on Thursday. Another front drops in the south and east through New England. It could cause some showers, maybe even some isolated strong thunderstorms late Thursday into Thursday night. That is pushing off to the south and east and clears the coast by the time we get to the all-important 4th of July holiday on Friday. Let's now push forward in time here, and again, kind of focusing on the tropical moisture over the southeastern U.S. Even the depiction of a kind of a low pressure area, weak nonetheless, but something we'll watch as that low pressure area could move out into the open waters of the southwestern Atlantic. This is the 4th of July forecast map. Very, very nice weather up across the mid-Atlantic. The northeast U.S., low humidity for this time of the year and comfortably warm temperatures as well for this time of the year. Let's keep moving forward here and we'll focus in, and becomes kind of an enhanced rainfall area over the upcoming weekend. And this is when that low pressure area could move out over the southwestern Atlantic, could intensify perhaps into a named tropical system. Again, whether or not it becomes a named tropical system, some of that tropical moisture right here starts to take a move to the north. This is on Sunday, and then we'll get into the day on Monday. And a lot of this is associated with that tropical wave. And again, there could be a little bit of a closed circulation right out here. Nothing strong, but enough that there could be some intensification, maybe even into a named tropical system. In this case, it would be the third of the Atlantic basin season, and then we go a little bit farther out in time, and again, some of that tropical moisture kind of flows to the north by next Tuesday, even a little bit of a low pressure area associated with, I believe, the remnants of that tropical system. It's a little hard to tell for sure, but here we are now all the way into next Tuesday night. Some decent rainfall, some of which is a contribution from that tropical wave. And here we go. By the time we get to the middle of next week, this is next Wednesday, a week from right now, we're talking about July 9th, you have this low pressure area, which again, I believe, if you trace it all the way back, is a reflection of that tropical system that right now is near the Florida Peninsula, and it does make a move to the north, especially during the early part of next week. And by the middle of next week, we could have some tropical moisture in the Mid-Atlantic region. There's also a high pressure area that could become an important player over the southeastern part of Canada. So we focused in on the tropical situation. So far, very, very quiet across the northern hemisphere, largely dictated to a very, very quiet western Pacific Ocean. We have this potential tropical system. It is a tropical wave, but it may become a named tropical system in the Atlantic Basin over the next several days, something we will closely monitor here as we go through the next several days into the middle part of next week. That's it for now. For ArcfieldWeather.com, this has been meteorologist Paul Dorian.